I didn't want to do this video. I didn't want to do it, at least not this early in the game. I didn't want to have the clickbaity title, "Are 450s too fast for Supercross?" or "How can we slow them down?" I haven't decided what I'm going to title this video yet. I didn't want to do it. But the topic is staring us in the face. It's clickbaity. It's the kind of thing that people put on YouTube. So while we're at it, like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. And let me mention sponsors while we continue to move in this direction. Anti-gravity batteries is on board. I've got 2 different batteries in my hands. Look, factory teams, the top ones. Factory Monster Energy Kawasaki, Factory Monster Energy Yamaha Star Racing use these batteries. Eli Tomac's used it in both of the bikes he's had in the last couple of years. I've got the very, very lightweight battery, and I've got the battery that's slightly heavier, but has so much extra juice. It actually has a built-in jump starter, and you could use it to jumpstart your truck. That's crazy. Go to antigravitybatteries.com. There are a lot of replacement lithium-ion batteries out on the market. These ones are better. Well, it's a clickbaity video, so let's go to it. Over the weekend in Seattle, we had a 47.9 second lap time from our leader and race dominator, Eli Tomac. He has won 5 races in a row. He has a gigantic points lead. Now, this often leads to a problem in the sport where we start to blame 4-strokes for everything. Now, look, some side effects of the 4-stroke coming in are inarguable. They do cost more to buy and to build, and they certainly cost more to fix when they break. But I've never been on the camp of let's blame everything on 4-strokes. For example, we have all this conjecture about how racing has changed with 4-strokes coming in. But I think if you took the average fan, not someone who rides and races, just a casual person who watches racing on TV, and you turn the volume down and you had them watch a race from now and 20 years ago, they probably wouldn't even know that they changed from 2-strokes to 4-strokes. Take the sound out of the equation, and Supercross still looks the same. They're doing the same things in the turns. They're jumping further on the jumps, which is the point of this video, but they're still jumping jumps. They're still going over whoops. They're still doing basically the same things. I've also heard the argument that, oh, the racing would be better if we just had 2-strokes again. The racing wasn't better when we had 2-strokes. I would argue that right now the racing is as close as it has ever been. I know that we had a blowout in Seattle, but up until then, every other race this year, 10 deep? We had a lot of drama, and the class was close, and the racing was action-packed. Just the last couple of weeks, like at the 9-minute mark, you got 4 and 5 guys on the same straightaway fighting and making a mistake, and somebody else comes back, and someone has a good lap, and someone has a bad lap. It's much more competitive with much more talent evenly matched, I feel, than it has ever been. You can maybe go back to 1985 when we had the high water mark of 8 winners in the same season and no one won 2 races in a row. Like statistically, you're never going to beat that. But if you even go back and watch some of those races, it's not like you had 8 riders all over each other battling for the lead down to the last lap. That's never happened in Supercross. The gaps at the finish line of most races recently, take Seattle out of the equation, are much closer than they used to be. Remember how Jeremy McGrath and Rick Johnson would be doing freestyle, basically, in the last couple laps because they had such a gigantic lead at the end. But I do know that the racing now is closer, really, than it's ever been if you look at it on paper as far as the gaps at the finish line and the gaps between the riders and the gaps in qualifying speed. I think the 4-stroke, honestly, has been good for racing. It's been great for privateers, by the way, who no longer have to worry about finding the horsepower to compete with the factories. And at that level, when they're not really modding the bikes out, they're actually pretty darn reliable. 454-stroke might be the best bike ever for the privateer. So there's actually a lot of things to like about the 4-stroke, except one thing. So we had a debate about this on our race review podcast on Sunday night with me, Jason Thomas, and Steve Mathis. Love them or hate them. We talked about, are the bikes too fast? And it was for 2 reasons. A, the 47-second lap time by Tomac, and also the fact that Tomac was going quad 3-3 through a rhythm lane, which is part of the reason the lap times were so short. So, yes, as much as I endorse, as much as I think the 454-stroke has not ruined racing, I think the bikes are too fast. Not because the riders can't ride them or control them. As a matter of fact, if you talk to the riders that ride 450s, they'll never go in that direction. Chad Reed, when he was there, right in the transition, he was on a carbureted 252-stroke, a carbureted 4-stroke, a fuel-injected 454-stroke. He thinks that the fuel-injected 454-stroke is the safest Supercross bike ever. It doesn't give you as much wheel spin. The power is much more predictable. When you get in trouble, you know exactly what the bike is going to do, unlike a 2-stroke where you have to manage that power band and maybe it's going to spin or maybe it's going to bog, and certainly better than the old bog days of the carburetor 4-strokes. You'll be hard-pressed to find a rider that doesn't think that the 454-stroke isn't good. The riders at the top level. But I think we need to protect them from themselves. The bikes are too fast, they can jump too much, And from a simple safety standpoint, that's what I'm worried about. And this is specifically to Supercross. It doesn't apply to the guy who's buying the motorcycle off the showroom floor and going and riding it and racing it. Those guys will just lug them around in third gear, and now we've got electronics that make them easier to ride than ever. Maybe you're going too fast, but that's another story for another day. I'm talking about the highest end level of racing, and here's where my theory came from. The Tampa Supercross in 2018. Cole Seely was running second in points in Monster Energy AMA Supercross. You might not even remember that, but he was. And he felt the pressure to try to track down Jason Anderson, to try to win races, to keep pressure on in the series. Now, there was a 3-4 rhythm in a rhythm lane that a couple of riders were doing in practice. Seely did not do it in practice. He knew he was going to have to do it in the night show, so he tried it in the heat race, and he came up short on the quad, and he crashed and got speared by his motorcycle. He did come back to racing the next year after some hellacious injuries, but Seely admitted over and over, I interviewed him a lot, he was never the same after that from a mental standpoint of wanting to push that envelope. And I think it's bad that the fact that the requirement to win races, to try to go for the title, was he had to try a 3-4 through a rhythm lane. A 3-4. That was big. And that's when I started thinking of these theories of how could you slow the bikes down in a way that doesn't fundamentally ruin the industry. Now, I've heard a lot of theories out there, some people saying, well, you just got to bring two strokes back and have a 125 two-stroke class, make the premier class 254 strokes, or maybe we need to have stock 254 strokes in one class and modified 254 strokes in another. Those options aren't going to work. The racing teams are the lifeblood of this. They're the ones that pay the heroes to come out there and race. That's the only way that this show is going to keep on going. And it has been going for 50-some years, which, as I mentioned in other videos, is the dream of most motorsports, to have a factory-supported effort showing up every single year and paying its athletes for 50-plus years. And other racing series have tried to mess with the formula, change the formula, regulate something out, regulate something in, and it almost always results in pissed-off manufacturers that then leave the sport. Now, motocross and supercross barely survived this transition from 2 strokes to 4 strokes. The manufacturers were perfectly fine continuing to do 2 strokes. But there was a thought that EPA regulations were coming and 2 strokes were going to be banned. That never happened. So the AMA tried to do the right thing and push 4 strokes by allowing larger displacement. It turned out that a 400 to 450 cc 4 strokes could be made better than 252 strokes, and that forced the manufacturer's hand simply because people are going to race the most effective machine and people are going to buy the most effective machine. And I know that the manufacturers, for example, I've talked to people at Kawasaki. They were fine producing KX250s. They had to spend all this money developing 4 strokes. They don't want to hear, sorry, we made a mistake, go back. They do not want to hear that. They already bent one time. It's that old, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. You don't want them to walk away. You're not going to bring 2 strokes back. It's just not going to happen. And I don't believe that they're going to want to race only 250cc machines. There has always been a model in this sport of 2 or 3 bikes that you can buy on the showroom floor that the top riders are demonstrating and marketing on race weekends. They still want 250s and 450s. Keep it that way as a simple mantra to not screw up racing. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do to prevent Eli Tomac from just casually throwing out a 4.33 in Seattle? What are we going to do to prevent Cole Seely types from having to go 3-4 in a rhythm if they want any shot at winning races? You got to make the bike slower. And look, that would actually be fine. Most racing series have dealt with this a million times. They get to the point where the cars are going 220 miles an hour and they just want them to go 200 miles an hour because they know the fan can't even tell the difference watching between 200 and 220. You can go back and watch old Supercross videos of Jeremy McGrath, who nobody thought looked slow. But if you watch it now, it definitely looks slower, and they're not jumping as far as today's Supercross bikes. But no one was in those stadiums back then saying it looked slow. And if Cole Seely, the challenge was to go 2-3 through a rhythm instead of 3-4, no one would have said, this is lame. They're only doing 2-3 through there. Why aren't they doing 3-4? No one would mind if they were jumping 20 feet less and maybe going, I'll put a percentage on it, 5% slower around the track. It would still look awesome. It would still look like Supercross did 10, 20 years earlier. So how do you do it? Now, 2 modest proposals that some engineer will probably tell me is absolutely asinine, both of them, but I'm going to throw them out there. One would be restrictor plates for the motorcycles. I know that's horrible, but like I said, other racing series have decided, the cars or the bikes are too fast. How are we going to do it? We're going to put a restrictor plate in them. And you can easily have this only apply to Supercross. So the manufacturers don't have to feel like their bikes are selling are neutered. They're not being told, change the production line, make them 350s. At one point, KTM thought the manufacturer was going to do that. Again, they don't like change. Just have a restrictor plate. Put a piece of paint on it when they go through tech inspection every Friday and say, now we know that restrictor plate is in there. If you break that paint, you broke the seal, you took the restrictor plate out. You could easily reduce the power of the bikes with that. Now look, the teams are going to work to get that power back. We know in the current era of 454 strokes, they're not even necessarily looking to gain tons more power. Some still are. The idea that they're completely detuning the bikes, that's not true. Tomac is happy that his bike has more power now than the bike he was on last year. Depends on who the rider is. Some like a mellower power. I've heard Ken Roczen sometimes asked to have power taken away. But then Justin Brayton says, I want to have as much power as possible. We'll move it around. I'll manage it the best I can. They're going to try to find a way to get that power back. But maybe that's the difference between a quad that the track builders didn't ever intend to be a quad being jumpable, and now they can only triple. Now, the track builders have done their best to try to restrict this. I was listening to the Gypsy Tales podcast with Jason Anderson. It was a really good listen. I recommend it. And he said they kind of purposely build transitions now to make it difficult to jump these things because they don't want you to jump these things. If they make it easy to jump, you're going to jump even further, which is dangerous. But then if you make the transitions purposely jacked up to prevent it, that's probably a little bit dangerous too. And that's just the conundrum we have with these bikes having this much power. And maybe there's one other thing that we can do. This one is really going to piss people off, but that's what clickbaity YouTube videos are for. When riders go to the International 6 Days Enduro in Europe, they complain because they have to run these eco tires or DOT tires. They are street legal tires because the International 6 Day Enduro in Europe is still based on riding legally on roads. They even have license plates and headlights. I don't even know if they work on the bikes. And they have these knobs that are lower. And every American rider who has to go over there and ride complains about how much less traction they have. So we see the races now. It's not just a combination of horsepower. Some people like to make the connection that 454 strokes are really the equivalent of 500 two-strokes, which only lasted in Supercross for a few years in the early 70s. They are not the equivalent of 500 two-strokes. Maybe on a dyno they are. But the magic formula of the four-stroke is that it has traction and it has predictable power. Power you can actually use, unlike a 500 two-stroke, which is either ripping your arms out of the sockets or spinning, or you were just afraid to get on the gas that much. There's a big difference in the rideability. The 454 strokes lulls you into a sense of comfort. The speed seems easy, where the 500 two-stroke, even the best riders in the world, were short-shifting them in fear of that thing either spinning, or worse yet, hooking up and ripping the arms out of the sockets. 454 strokes are incredibly easy to ride, which means they're incredibly easy to go fast and jump huge things on. So what if we added just a little bit of a challenge? What if someone regulated the height of the knobs in the tires? You would have to brake a little earlier for the corner. You couldn't carry as much speed to the corner. You couldn't accelerate out of the corner as well. You wouldn't be able to jump as much. You wouldn't be able to go as fast. And what's more, they wouldn't tear up the tracks as much, which is why in Europe they call them eco tires, because they don't want to tear up the trails and get all the land shut down, although I think it already happened in Europe anyway. But it would lead to less wear and tear on the racetrack, which I think most riders would say would be good in an era of 20-minute main events and 454 strokes, which create these giant ruts and holes in the track. Now, I don't expect any of these suggestions to be popular because it is the job of a rider and a race team to always strive to be better, to be faster, to have better performance. No person that has spent the last, say, 20 years of their adult life waking up to try to make a motorcycle better is going to say, I got an awesome idea. Give us some rules that give us less traction, make us corner and brake slower, and give us less power. No one wants that. But that's what other racing series have had to do to help the riders, the drivers, and the teams police themselves and slow things down. And again, the speeds that we're talking about slowing would probably be relatively invisible to the naked eye. I'm not saying we're going to see riders singling through rhythm lanes. So let me do the last thing that we would do on a clickbaity YouTube video and say, leave your comments below if you think these suggestions that I have are absolutely crazy or not. I will leave you with this. Tyler Keefe of the Troy Lee Designs Gas Red Bull team said, yeah, the old original 250Fs were about 40-ish horsepower. Now we're up to 50. That's how much faster the bikes have gotten. Think about that. All right, thanks for watching.